Okay, and we left off talking about hair follicles in the last video, so I just wanted to complete that. This erector pili, this smooth muscle actually helps to control the movement of the hair, and also would enhance some of our shivering, right, for thermoregulation. It'd probably be a much more significant effect in an animal which moves its hair for communication, right? The sebaceous glands actually create this kind of waxy substance that then coats the hair and helps keep hair supple, if you will, but also helps to prevent water loss in us. All right, the nails, which are also part of our integument, one of the accessories here. All right, so when we look at the nail head on and just cut away to look underneath there, there's not really much to note. This, of course, is the distal phalange or phalanx in this case, so a bone, and then packed in place around it a lot of fat tissue and connective tissue. And so here, again, we're looking at the root of the nail's body, and a few other features here, but not really something I'm interested in testing you guys on, but just, I want to follow along with the book. I mentioned here, again, like hair, we spent a lot of time talking about nails, but really nails solely protect our terminal digits in humans. They are, of course, claws, modified claws, and other structures in other mammals, but humans, it's really a protective feature since we reach out with these fingers and utilize tools and so forth. So the nail bed, of course, is also epithelial with its own, again, the stratum basale there is present there to continuously supply, which is why nails continue to grow, right? And then the nail body is really the plate that we think of, the majority of what we consider it. And this is dead keratinocytes, and they form from this root part. And again, very similar to the way skin itself works in pushing up, constantly dividing and pushing up new cells, and the cells dying, right? There's a feature that we kind of look at and easily identify called the lunula, but again, I'm not really interested. The cuticle down here, and there's these lateral folds. So I really don't see writing any test questions on nails, honestly. So, and I don't ask about them in lab either. So you're kind of off the hook. If you want to know more about nails, you're just going to have to talk to somebody else, basically, is what I'm going to tell you, right? So continuing, though, with these accessorizations, besides hair and nails, we have some glands. And we've looked a little bit at sebaceous glands, and we're going to look at them again. But first, let's look at these, a multitude of glands called our sweat glands. All right, and these have a very important role in helping us with temperature regulation. All right. It turns out, your sweat glands are basically merocrine in their secretion, so they secrete vesicles of this substance we call sweat. And they're exocrine glands, so they have to have little ducts that lead up to the surface. And on your slides, you generally won't see this. On the models, it'll be pretty obvious. And of course, the pores in your skin are those openings, right? And if they are associated, if the sweat gland is associated with a hair follicle, we refer to them as apocrine glands, even though that's kind of a misnomer. It's not. They don't actually secrete via a piece of the cell, right? The apocrine sweat glands that associate with hairs and are found really only in certain parts of the body, the underarms, right, the genital area. Their product of sweat has some additional organic chemicals in it that help to give us very unique smells or scents, and this helps us in mate choice and behaviors and things like that. Okay, so again, I just reiterate this idea that these sweat glands here that stand alone are definitely considered the merocrine, and we just call them the eccrine sweat glands. They secrete in a merocrine fashion, and they are exocrine, and their main function is really to help us with regulating temperature. There's mostly water here and some salts or some excretion done, that function that we talked about in the first video. There are antibodies and some antimicrobial proteins, small proteins, peptides, that we find in our sweat too to help protect us, right? If they are apocrine, again, we discovered that these actually secrete both of these secrete in a merocrine manner, little vesicles excreted. They're usually associated with a hair follicle. They have a different chemicals in their secretions, and those chemicals are often used by bacteria that associate with our skin, and so they give us unique odors and scents. And as I said here, they're not as common. The underarms, around the genital area, and the nipples would have apocrine sweat glands. All right, so sebaceous glands, and here we're seeing them from a slide. So this is the hair follicle here. So these are, again, these epidermal cells were in the dermis itself. They've invaded in, so you notice all those active epidermal cells. So here's the gland. The glands look different than sweat glands do. These are sweat glands down here, right? And some of these features might be ducts. This is fairly low magnification, but you can easily tell the difference between this thing and these things. These are, we call them alveolar in appearance. They look like clusters of grapes. They're much larger cells than we see down here, right? Remember the purple dot, the nuclei? Purple dot, the nuclei. And the cytoplasm, they produce a waxy, fatty substance, so the cells themselves don't take up stain as well, so they appear lighter in color, and they're pretty easy to see, all right? It turns out sebaceous glands are actually holocrine glands, so that sebum, which is their secretion, is entire cells being slothed off, which is why we can have problems with people's bacteria colonizing this and leading to acne. All right, so of course sebaceous glands associate with hair, as I've tried to point out here, and that means anywhere that we have hair we could have sebaceous glands. But so where don't we have hair? And I mentioned this again on the previous slide, but I really want to focus on, palms and soles. And I said, now, here's a good reason, right? This is a slippery, greasy substance, right? And the palms and the soles are areas where we grip. I mean, that's why we had the extended dermal papillae that we do. So it wouldn't be good to have hair follicles, and especially sebaceous glands, associated with those areas of the body. All right? Again, they connect through a duct. It's a very short duct, and you can't see it here, but you'll see it on the models. So they are exocrine, and they release the whole cell. So this, again, is a holocrine secretion, as opposed to merocrine or apocrine. And the product is sebum, and sebum has a lot of different things in it. It does have still antimicrobials. You are very protective of the skin, because it is an access point for microbes. And this waxy part helps to prevent dehydration of the skin. All right, so in this part we're going to talk about the physiology of the integument. And again, coming back to those 5 functions, right? The idea of protection and regulation of temperature and excretion of waste, right? So protection, right? Here there's a lot of ways that the skin protects us. So here's just a short list, right? Again, prevents from dehydration, that keratinized epidermis, right? So this hardened, lots of this protein in hardening the epidermis. And then these waxy, right, these sugary lipids that are waxy. Prevents entry of microbes, right? So we've talked about a number of secretions in sweat glands and sebaceous glands, and that help to, right, or have antimicrobials. And the cells themselves are very, very tightly, they're very close together. So you can't slip between these cells. They protect from abrasions. Again, you've got stratified squamous here, so you can lose a few layers, right? You can have friction and lose some of those can come off, and you still have more layers beneath. And of course, the melanin in them that's produced by those melanocytes helps to absorb that UV light, which is energy and could destroy cells and DNA. Sensory. So here we're pointing to one of the Meissner's corpuscles, these tactile sensors. There's a lot of these in the dermis, all right, and that's because it's our contact with the world. And so we also have free nerve endings that surround our hair follicles. We call this the hair root plexus. And as I said, so when hair moves, that starts an action potential, which tells our brain that we've been touched, which comes in handy, right, when you think about mosquitoes and bugs and things that could try to harm you. So you're aware of the things crawling on you. All right? I know that sounds weird, but you're aware, right? Meissner's corpuscles, again, these are what we call discriminative touch, and that light tactile that you've been touched, right? There are deeper down, there are these Pacinian corpuscles. They're also called lamellated. They look like onions sometimes. And so these are really for deep pressure or vibration, right? So to get them excited and therefore sense, right, excitation, start an action potential, you have to have a more force. There's Merkel cells, and we said these can be found even in the epidermis, and they also help us with touch. And then we have free nerve endings for pain and temperature, both hot and cold. All right? So temperature regulation. All right? So we got sensory, we have protection, temperature regulation. Right? Remember that for all that chemistry, biochemistry, metabolism going on in your body, you need to stay fairly constant, because if it gets too cold, all these molecules slow down a bit. If it gets too warm, you can denature the proteins, and then you can't have any function. So we have to be able to deal with changes in temperature. So ways you gain heat, well, exercise, increased metabolic rates, right? The environment, yeah, we live in Texas, right? Fever, right? Our heat losses are generally environment, and again, remember, you know, this temperature is not the average for the state of Texas. So we do have to invest a lot of effort into maintaining internal heat, right? So how do we do these increase decreases in this? So here again, you have to have a way to sense the problem, and this we said we have thermoreceptors, so we have lots of sensory. And you have to then send that to an area of the brain, and the brain has to then direct a response back to muscles and glands in the skin. All right? So here I remind you that there, you know, heat, this physical presence, energy, lowest form of energy. Heat leaves through radiation, right, which moves off of an object. They don't have to be in direct contact. Conduction means direct contact. Convection is when, you know, there's movement from the cooler air is replaced by warmer air and helps to move on the heat. And evaporation, which is when we transfer the heat to water, and water changes its state of matter, right, from liquid to gas, sweat, to, you know, the air around us. All right, so we are trying, right, and I say here, if you can't do this correction we're going to look at, you will have hyper, so high temperature, or hypothermia. So here we have the situation where it's cold, right, and we need to retain heat. So how do we do this? Well, circulation to the skin is reduced, right? So they're bypassing it with these arrows. So you tend to look paler, you feel cooler in the skin, all right? And then we could add shivering if we needed to, because anytime a muscle contracts, you are transferring energy. And likewise, it can get too warm, or you can force it to be too warm, right? And so you are trying to radiate and convect heat, right? And this heat is being transferred from the body, which is warming up, right, to the skin through vasodilation. So this is a vasoconstriction, this is a vasodilation. And so, and then, of course, your sweat glands sweat. All right? Another function of skin, of course, is vitamin D synthesis. And I mentioned this on the first slide when we talked, first video when we talked about what does the skin do. So vitamin D is necessary to help us with the absorption of calcium and phosphorus, which we need for a number of things, bone growth and development, but also neuromuscular function. So calcium is a mineral, you don't make that, but you can store it. But we do get it primarily from our diets, and then build our bones, and then we can tap into that. But we'd really like to get it from our diet so that we don't start, right, dissolving our bones, right? So the epidermis has a steroid. So steroids are based on cholesterol, as we mentioned about the hydrocholesterol, that can be converted to cholecalciferol, all right? And this happens in the presence of UV radiation, sunlight. The liver, as I mentioned, you know, there's an intricate exchange between several different parts of the body. The liver converts this to calcidiol, right? And then the kidneys convert this finally, and they release it into blood, and then it goes to the kidneys, and the kidneys convert to calcitriol, right? And this is what we consider the active vitamin D. All right? So I think I'll stop here so that we can then save this for the fourth video, and this is a good stopping place, so we'll call it here.